Um, all right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're located and whenever you are listening to Coffee Time with Crystal. I am your podcast host, Crystal Riley. I am a realtor in the Reno, Nevada area and a coach with Growing into Grace Coaching. And I am here with Cathy Lucas she is an advocate for the Resiliency Foundation. And so Cathy, welcome, and I'm glad you're here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes. So we just got to spend a few minutes talking prior to hitting the record button, and you were sharing how you were a child bride and how you became an advocate for the Resiliency Foundation. Can you share and give us a little bit of history about your family history as you were growing up, and then what led you into being a child bride, and at what age was that?
Yes. I was raised in a very conservative, very large conservative family from Appalachia. We moved to Indiana when I was in grade school, but a lot of that culture, of course, remained with us because most of us moved together. So my grandfather and father didn't have to work in the coal mines any longer. We were also very part of a very conservative fundamentalist religion. I won't name the church, but it wasn't as much the church as it was the influence of the teachings of uber conservative women's roles, very strict women's and men's roles and identities, and girls were just raised to be moms and servants to their husbands. So it was very common in my family mostly to get married young. A lot of people in our church here, once we moved to Indiana, that wasn't as common in the church, but in Appalachia, where I was born and where all my family was raised, that was very common. I have cousins that also got married. I think I'm the youngest. I was 14 when I got married, and
Okay.
I was 13 when I started dating him, and he was 19.
Okay, so you were 13 when you started dating. So you did have a dating season. You weren't just tossed into the marriage. How
I
does
was lost into marriage. No.
how does so help me understand how that works in that culture, that they prepare you to meet your spouse at 13 years old and then into getting married at 14.
I wasn't groomed necessarily for that at that age. I was just it was seen as very safe for a girl to get married. It was very safe. They wanted us to marry in our church. We weren't allowed to date or and I use date loosely. I mean, at 13, after having children, that's not really, it wasn't really like you would think of teenagers in high school and things like that. Obviously, I couldn't drive, but I was because this man went to our church. Like I said, he was 19, but he was an adult man, which is the case with most child marriages, as younger girls and adult men. I was allowed to date him because he was seen as he was trustworthy in the eyes of my mom and my family, because he was in our church. That didn't mean he was, but he was seen that way because the people in our church were seen as, let me back up. We were raised to believe that people outside our church could be very dangerous, because it led us to the possibility of being led astray, or I was just raised in a culture of fear, everything from God to people outside of our religion, and even, family to a great degree, because my family was so large. That was my primary community. And I really I did go to public school then, but I only went to 8th grade. I got married the day I should have graduated 8th grade.
Okay. And so he was 19. How did how did you meet him? Did your parents meet him and then introduce you guys, or how does that
No, I
happen?
met him at church. He was one of the young people at our church, and we had, Bible study groups, Sunday school, type things. And um, that at that point, our church wasn't that large, so there weren't that many young people. We all were kind of
Interacted.
each other. But he was way older than me, because 5 years at
It's
13, 5 years, 5, 6 years is a big
That's a
difference.
big difference,
If
right?
you're 25 or 30, whatever, that's not that big of a deal. But when you're 13, 14 years old, 5 years is a lifetime of difference.
Right. Right.
Um, but he asked to like sit by me at church and things like that. We would kind of sit back and, behind our parents and things like that. And then he asked me to go on a date, and I was 13. Of course, I wanted to go. Here was this older guy, and
That was
so I asked my
interesting, right?
mom. My dad wasn't part of the church. He was not at that time. Um, he, but my mom said allowed it, and I went out with him the first time on Thanksgiving weekend, and we were engaged 6 weeks later on my 14th birthday.
Wow. And you were married at 14?
I was married 6 months later at 14.
Wow. And then, I mean, if that's how you're raised, that's the norm, right? That's
Well, I
hard
mean,
to
at
wrap
this
some people's minds around it, but if that's in what you're raised around, it's probably the
It
norm.
was starting to not be the norm so much, because we did live in Indiana, but we did have a huge history of that. It was very generational in my family. My mom was like 16. Her mom, my grandmother, we don't even know how old she was. I don't even think they have a birth certificate for my grandmother, but we think she might have been 13. But my grandmother had birthed 12 children before she was 30.
Wow.
And so, like I said, it's cultural and generational. And as a lot of things are, the generational aspect of child marriage is the effects of it are generational.
Right.
Even if the tradition ends, because it did end with me, as far as I had other cousins that came up after me that were fairly young. I think there was a couple, maybe one more, that got married at 16 after I did, but it pretty much, phased out after I was at the very end of that cultural norm in my family.
Yeah. My
Go
we
ahead.
have I don't think it was our norm. I think that there was something you said about it being generational. So, my mom was married at 17. And I have a couple siblings with my biological father, but the norm for my family, and not because of religion, it just was just their norm, was
Mhm.
the getting married at a young age and then having children. I didn't get married until I was almost 25, I think 24. No, I was 24. And then so I've shifted that. And then my daughter is 19 and she's thankfully not married yet. So
Right.
it's just interesting
And I
to
think
see.
back, the further we go back in time, the more common it was to be married young,
Mhm.
back when, so, 17, 18 was not uncommon
Right.
at
Right.
all for both parties. And I think that's important as well. Um, and it's
But,
still important.
but 13, 14, I mean, that's a child, right?
It is a child.
You were a child. So
Absolutely.
it's very interesting. So you got married and then you moved in with him, I'm assuming.
Mhm.
Um,
For the first time, I lived away off of the street with most of my extended family. When we moved to Indiana, we all moved to one street
on
in,
straight.
in a very urban west side of Indianapolis. We took up the good part of a city block.
Nice.
So it was almost a communal style living. My grandmother lived next door to us, and I had aunts across the street. My uncle was down the street. My mom's younger siblings still lived at home. Their backstory is more fascinating than mine, even, but there's to tell quite most of it. But when I got married, we moved several miles away. I could walk home. Um, it was quite a walk, and it wasn't the best neighborhood, but I was probably, I don't know how, 3-4 miles, which I didn't have, like I said, I didn't have a driver's license. So it might as well have been, it felt like it was across the world.
Right.
And that's when reality set in. It set in before that. And part of it was back to the courtship dating part. When he asked me at 14 to marry him, my family didn't, I wasn't forced. I was not forced, but I would say I was unprotected at least, because I was 13, 14, and
Right.
this guy wanted me to marry him. And at first I said yes. And mainly, I mean, this is full honest, disclosure. He was very, like I said, they trusted him because he was in our church, but he was very handsy, I'll just say. And when we would go out, my mom let us date unaccompanied, and we'd go to the movies and things like that. And he touched me under my clothes. And so I felt obligated to marry him because to me, that was sexual contact, and I didn't know any different. And I was taught that if you had sex with somebody, you had to marry them.
Hear them. Yeah.
And so he held that over my head. And then once we were engaged and we got permission from my mom to get married from my parents, I tried to back out several times in the 6 months from January to June. And because I would go to school, my friends, my teachers would be like, this is not okay. This isn't normal. Like, you're going to high school next year. You need to go to ball games. You need to be a kid. You're a kid.
Right.
And I was raised in a very worker bee community where everybody, all the women cooked and took care of the babies, and we lived very close knit, and everybody was in everybody's house and watching, taking care of everything. So I had skills, I did have those skills, which I would say in child marriage, mine was probably best case scenario, which is one reason I try to share my story, because there's so many horrific stories. And as far as those go, if you're going to put it on a scale, mine may not seem so bad, but
it still has its own traumas attached to it.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah. And that's my point. It's the best case scenario still, even though I had physical skills. No 13, 14-year-old, 15-year-old needs to be running a whole household, managing money, helping with is what access I had to the money. Having a baby at 15 while I had no legal rights. And that's what people don't get is, as kids who get married under 18, they have no legal rights. Their husband or the adult in the situation becomes their guardian, and they can't get a divorce, can't even go to a domestic violence shelter because they're under.
Even though they're married.
Yes.
So would they have to get emancipated to have those rights?
It doesn't automatically mean that they're emancipated, which is weird.
I guess I would have thought if you got married at a young age, it would technically emancipate you. Well, that's a good little tidbit. Okay.
My husband had to withdraw me from high school, and he had to sign for my driver's license. He had to
wow.
He had to sign for my first, when I had my daughter at 15. He had to go with me and sign for me to get prenatal care.
Wow. Okay.
And like different states can have slightly different caveats to those laws.
Mm-hmm.
It's still, you are an adult. You're not a legal adult. You can't sign a contract. You can't. It's
even though you're married, you can't go and buy a house if your partner or your husband was. Wow, that's just so crazy.
Right. We actually bought a house when I was 16. We bought our first home I was 15 because I was pregnant with my daughter but I couldn't be on the loan because I was only 15. So I could get married, but I couldn't be on my own home loan.
It's so mind-blowing. Okay, so you shared in the pre-talk that you were married for 15 years. So and you had 3 children. So do you want to share, take a couple of minutes and share what that 15 years was like, and then maybe a little bit about why you decided to get separated, and lead us into that?
Okay. The 15 years was very traditional. Like I said, and within a few months, we moved back to the same street with my family. So that helped me emotionally, and with, the baby, because I had a baby. I had my daughter a year after I was married. And so that made it more tolerable. He wasn't physically abusive he did during the divorce. He did get physically abusive because he didn't want the divorce. But he, like I said, very traditional. I wasn't old enough to get a job. I tried to get a job the first summer we were married, that summer, and I went to fast food restaurants, and they're like, "You're 14, you can't get a job. You're too young to get a
You're
job."
married.
So economically, there was no options. And then by the time I was 16, I had a baby. I'd had my daughter. At 17, I had a miscarriage. 18, I had another baby. And then at 21, I had a third child, my son, Jake. And like I said, very traditional. We were not close as a couple, because I went back home, basically lived next door to my parents, became part of that. And that's what sustained it for 15 years. And we were not allowed to get a divorce because I was still in that church, and that church does not sanction
Divorce.
And they would have allowed it had I proved he was, had an affair or something like that. But that was the only exception, was if one of the partners was unfaithful. So not even if you did it when you were a kid and you had no idea what you were doing. And you tried to get out. Like I tried to get out of it several times between the quote engagement and when we got married. I tried to break off the engagement.
How were you able to finally get out of it? And how long did you continue into your religion and that faith?
I left that church before I actually got a divorce. I went when my youngest child at the time, Jake, when he was a toddler, I went and got my GED because I never went to high school. And then when he went to kindergarten, I went to college. I always wanted an education. Like I really had a burning desire for an education. And so I went to college, and the more I was outside of that, because that was the first time I was really outside of that bubble. Like I had small jobs, but I always felt guilty because we were taught, we should be at home taking care of our house. And like, I really felt guilty for having a job, and like the guilt from that upbringing, it plagued lots of areas of my life for years, even after I was out of that religion. That was a hard thing to deal with, was the guilt and shame of some of the things I had walked away from, feeling like, what if I'm, thinking I'm sinning, but also feeling so compelled to find a different, knowing there was more, that there was something that I was not, getting in that environment. So I left the church, eventually got a divorce. And I pretty much lost my relationship with my whole family.
I was actually going to ask if you have a relationship with your family or your parents. And
I have somewhat of a relationship with my mom. My dad just passed in February. I had reestablished. I never really lost a relationship with my dad because, like I said, he wasn't religious, and he actually, even secretly, there was times he would come and bring me money and say, don't tell mom, just take this. But he knew I struggled with 3 kids as a single mom, even though I had a good job at the hospital. I went into medical imaging and had a really good job, but I'd never been on my own. I never had to navigate that emotionally. So my dad he had his own issues. He struggled with alcoholism and a lot of the typical, he was 81 when he passed. A lot of the typical misogynist, all kinds of stuff that came with being a older, Appalachian man. And their roles had been super traditional as well, obviously. So, and my mom and mine's relationship, it's as established as it's going to be, I think. I will do anything to help her and take care of her. We aren't terribly close. She's still in that religion, and we just have a totally different belief system. It's not that I haven't forgiven her or that I think she's a terrible person or anything like that. Like, I don't hold any grudges against my mom. We just don't have anything in common.
Right.
And I've had to get past a lot of stuff. And she probably has, as far as I'm concerned, too. So I don't know.
Right. How many siblings do you have?
I have a brother and 2 sisters.
A brother and 2 sisters. Were they all married young as well?
Yes, not that young. None of them were under 18. But I think they were all around 18 or 19.
Okay.
They got married.
So living, okay, actually, so you were able to get divorced and you were in it for 15 years, so 31? Am I doing the math right? I don't know, 30, 29?
29.
29? Yeah, see my math. Chicken math. I do chicken math. So I just make up numbers. So anyways.
I graduated college in July and got divorced in November. I was divorced. I was moved out and everything by November.
By November. And then, are you currently married, or did you remarry? Because I believe you said you have more children too.
I did remarry. I remarried. I have 7 children total. I remarried a couple of years after my divorce, and that marriage lasted 30 years. I'm recently divorced from my second husband, but we had 2 more children. I had 3 when we got married. Then we had 2 more together that I birthed, and then we adopted 2 from Ukraine.
Oh, how awesome. That's awesome. So thank you for sharing that. So we are a radical forgiveness podcast. So and I know that you are currently in a place of, I mean, it's really beautiful to see you're at peace with all of the things that happened or your parents allowed to happen, and maybe not feeling protected, and then there's the religion on top of it. So can you share with us a little bit about, maybe some of your memories and how you were feeling at the time, some of the emotions and feelings at the time of maybe like when you were getting married and how you felt with your parents, or were you okay with it? Or were you angry with them that they allowed it, or did that come later? And then what steps did you take to be able to be living in peace and forgiveness?
I was not okay with it, but I also was not okay voicing that. So not having, because at 14, you don't have, most 14-year-olds, especially in the way I was raised anyway, we didn't have a voice.
Right.
So
I didn't either.
no point of reference to feel comfortable going to my parents after they said we could get married and backtracking, because I did try to backtrack. I went to my then, fiance, and said, hey, I don't want to do this. I went to him several times because like I said, when I would go to school, and my friends, my teachers, and people, when I met people that, when I met resistance and people were voices of reason, like, this isn't normal. This is not healthy. You can't do this. This is not, you're a kid. Then I would be like, oh my gosh, they're right. I'm a kid. I don't need to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to marry him. I felt obligated because I felt like we had sexual contact, but I don't want to do this. But so I would go to him and I would tell him, I don't want to do this. I don't want to get married. I'm too young. I'm a kid. I want to go to high school. And he would cry and he would threaten to kill himself. And he would threaten to tell that we'd had that I had let him touch me. And like I said, I wasn't forced, and it wasn't my parents, but I didn't have that protection. It was neglectful. I mean,
Right.
you know, I'm just going to call it what it was, because at 13 and 14, to leave your child exposed to an adult man, to be manipulated, to have that kind of um, unsupervised access to an undeveloped child, which
Right.
nobody's that at 13, 14 years old. That's the whole point with child marriage in this country, which is still legal in 22 states, or the 42 states. 20, I wish 20. I
Oh,
wish
it's
one
it's
state,
it's legal in 42 states?
42
Oh, I
states.
thought you said it was in 22 states. Oh my
I
gosh.
might have said earlier, but no, it's 42.
42.
It's only illegal in 8 states. So
Okay.
Michigan is on the verge of being the 9th state. We want a federal law banning marriage 18, no exceptions. Like 18 in my book's too young, but that's a legal age. You can sign contracts, you can join the military, and vote. You know, there's things
Right.
you can do at 18 that
You just
is
can't
not
drink.
afforded to the child, no matter if their mom or dad says they can or not. You
Yeah.
know, they can't take their child to the voting booth and say, she's mature, I'm going to sign for her to vote, or
Right.
buy cigarettes or alcohol or go to the military. You know, marriage is the only thing you can do this with in this country.
I know, and
And
it's crazy.
it's not even legally and it's not even, it's federally illegal in Pakistan.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. It should be. I mean, it's
It should be. But most people are surprised by that, because they're like, oh, you know, I'm not
yeah,
saying it doesn't happen in remote villages and things, but it's federally illegal to marry under the age of 18 in Pakistan.
in Pakistan. Yeah. Do you have any tips of, because you have been through so much, do you have any tips that you'd like to share that helped you get into that place of grace and forgiveness?
Yes. First, I had to get really healthy and do a lot of work myself. I had to, that was the first, because I was angry. When it hit me, when my daughter started getting to that age, and when I got the divorce and how I was treated because I got a divorce, and how I was held accountable for that, but not given, you know, the proper consideration as a child, and that I got into this as a child, but I wasn't able to make a decision to get out of it as an adult. And that I went through a lot of anger and confusion, fear, shame. I mean, all of it for too long. And I didn't know how to process it all. I got into my second marriage with those wounds unhealed. That was not a direct reason that we got a divorce. I mean, over 30 years, we both had done a lot of work.
Mhm.
I had done a lot of work before this divorce is a totally different story, but that I won't go into. But I the first step was forgiving myself. To do enough healing and enough um I want to knowledge, I guess. I did a lot of studying of what I'd been taught. I had to get to the bottom of things. Like, I'm a very I like to learn. And
Dig into the root, right? There's a root cause of everything.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
And I wanted to get educated on where some of these beliefs even came from. Like, where anything, like even like the origins of the doctrine of hell was a big one for me. I did a whole class on it. I took all these history classes, all these original language classes of the translations of the word hell and torment, you know, all this stuff. So I did some deep dives into a lot of things that I was still holding on to the fear. So I had to go through a lot of personal growth therapy and to get to the point where I could even peel back enough layers to forgive myself for being a teenage parent, for being a traumatized mom and raising my children and being too harsh and being too triggered and, you know, being too. Plus, as a woman, I was taught not to be too whatever.
All the things, right?
Right, all the things. So learning to get free of that, and as much as you can.
Mhm. Right.
But but there was a lot I've developed over that period of time, the ability to first understand what forgiveness was, and what it wasn't was more important to me, because I was taught that you forgive people, that means you accept them back into your life. That forgiveness and relationship were the same. When I realized that that wasn't the truth, that was a huge
Game changer, right? I
game
believe I
changer.
read forgiveness isn't always about reconciliation, or you had something in that like that, and I totally agree.
Mhm.
We can forgive, and it's not necessarily for the other person because you want to go hang out with them.
Yeah,
It's simply for our hearts, so that we don't sit with all that ugliness and it grows into the bitterness, and then it develops into all kinds of issues that come out because you
yep.
haven't dealt with the root of the issue. So I loved reading, I love seeing that in your questions from the pre-interview questions. So how did you realize, when was that light bulb moment, or when did you realize that you don't have to reconcile and that you can forgive without the reconciliation? What did
I
that
think
look like?
in my studies, in my religious studies, because even though I don't identify as a Christian anymore necessarily, because, but I'm very intrigued with the Bible and other religious writings, other sacred texts. I've taken a lot of classes and done a lot of education, like I said, because that's how I free myself of things. Is I have to feel like I've arrived at least some kind of truth. And that goes back to, I'm sure, how I was raised, because I was raised, everything was black and white, right or wrong. We're right. Everybody else is
Right.
right. We're good. They're bad. Everything was that way. And I had to grow, out of that and learn um, how to accept the fact that I didn't have to be in a relationship with everybody. And I don't remember the exact light bulb moment for realizing that it wasn't the same thing. Maybe I'm sure I read it in a book, because I read so many books. I'm sure I read it somewhere, and it was like, okay, wait a minute, what does this mean? Like, I would go back and go through the wording, and even in the Bible,
Mhm.
and use that as my catalyst to say, what does forgiveness really, really mean? Because they would say, well, if God forgives you, that means you can go to heaven, based, in a simplistic way.
Right.
And if he doesn't, then you can't. So that's how you get in relationship with God, is if in he, they use, that is to achieve forgiveness. And that means that you're back in relationship with God. And I realized, well, number one, I'm not God, and that's okay. If that's what they want to do, that's
Mhm.
way above my pay grade.
Right. I totally,
And I
yeah.
thought, logically, that can't be true on a human level. Like I said, divinely, that's not my call. My whole set of beliefs doesn't have anything to do with that anymore. I'd have no fear whatsoever of God or hell or anything like that. None, literally none. And no more than I want my children to fear me.
Right.
Like, I raised my children in an atmosphere of fear, and that's been the biggest thing I've had to get over with myself, and to forgive myself for, and ask them to forgive me for, because I was the same parent that parented me, especially the younger I was, and then add two more kids on top of the three I had, and I had no help. It just like it
Would
took
say,
me
I
years.
mean, you were a child, so we only know what we know. That's kind of helped me with some of the things that I've gone through in my childhood, is knowing that my parents were really young, and they did that. You only know what you know. And back when, you were younger and having children, you didn't have Google, right? Google
Right.
didn't exist. So it's not like we could be like, how screwed up are my kids going to be if I do this, or
And I
whatever.
didn't have role models. And I
Mhm.
think that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, is I want to be a role model now. Like, I'm not who I was 5 years ago, even, or yesterday, hopefully, or especially 15, 20, 30, 40. I'm not that person anymore. I feel like I want to constantly
Right.
evolve and be a better person.
Mhm. Right.
And um, that's when I came to the realization about forgiveness, that it was for me. And it was not whole. I heard a quote one time. It might have been Rumi. I don't remember, but it was Buddha, somebody, it was somebody like that, but they said that holding on to holding on to the pain of what somebody else has done to you or allowed to be done to you is, and I'm totally paraphrasing, was like a vessel that held the acid. It only eats the vessel. Like, you just got to get rid of the acid. It doesn't have anything to do with the other. It could lead to reconciliation. It could be a catalyst for reconciliation. Most certainly it's going to be involved in relationships that you want to maintain. There's going to have to be a lot of forgiveness in relationships. If you want to have reconciliation and healthy relationships, absolutely forgiveness is going to have to be part of it. But it is not relationship, and it's not reconciliation. And because there was people, my first husband, I'll just take their kid. He has not seen our children, my three older children, since our divorce 35 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And
that's
I have
a whole other podcast.
Right.
For time's sake.
Yeah. I don't like him.
Yeah.
I will never like that man because he hurt my children. He hurt me. He was a lot of things I don't admire. I don't want to see that man again. Right. I don't have any hard feelings against him as far as holding it on to where they hurt me or wishing him ill. I don't wish him ill. I hope he finds healing. I hope he finds peace somewhere. I don't think anybody should live in hell. I believe that's what we create for ourselves. And I don't wish that on anybody. I feel like the people who hurt other people the worst and who are the worst people are the ones that need the balm the most, the healing balm, because I know what it's like to hold that. And I know how, I know what it's like to cry myself to sleep because I can't forgive myself or other people because I feel like I've been so hurt and I've been such a victim. And I had to step outside of that and say, you know what? I deserve more than that. I deserve more than that. They deserve more than that. And that's when I really, to be able to have these tools for forgiveness, one of them is empathy. And for myself, my younger self, my child self, my parents, whoever I've ever had conflict with or been, I won't say conflict. We have conflict with everybody. It's healthy.
Right.
If you handle it healthy, that's part of life.
I mean, hurting people hurt people, right? And so we're in that wounded space. We don't act necessarily to our best versions of ourselves. And then there's this, I always say hurting people hurt people, and until those wounds are healed, and it's really hard to love people where they're at or to give grace and forgiveness if we're hurting because we're reacting.
I think it's because they can't see. For me, I couldn't see my way out for my own self. So if I can't even have empathy for me and the mistakes I made, then how can I can't for somebody else? I cannot. And that's where the hurt people come in, is if you're not healed, then you don't want to see other people healed.
Right.
And, I had to get to the place where I had enough self-awareness that, number one, I was worthy, period. This teachings, this is my own opinion. But those teachings of, we're so unworthy, and even the whole, I'm gonna step on toes right now, but whatever. Like a friend of mine, actually, he's a pastor. I was part of a Quaker church for a long time, that I had a lot of healing happen in. And the pastor's an author. His name's Phil Gully. And he wrote a book, and it's called If Grace is True. And that book helped me on my healing journey because it hit me. If grace is true, it's true. Like, my views of God have evolved and changed over the years. And like I said, I'm not religious at all. I have my own spiritual practice. I'm very curious. That's where I am in the spiritual realm, is I'm very curious, and I'm very aware that that this ain't it for me and in here, and that I'm, there's something,
Absolutely.
there is that of God in everyone. That's what I learned from the Quaker Church. And in this book, If Grace is True, I just come to believe, and then in my studies about hell, it's either for everybody or it's not. You either have to earn it or you don't, period. And that's very lightning. Not enlightening. It's very lightning for your soul to realize I'm safe. Because until we realize how safe we are spiritually with our divine parent, as safe as I want my kids to feel, and let's even go farther, my grandkids, because God, I want my grandkids to be, they don't have to have any fear of me.
Right.
So if I look at God as my grandparent, it's even better. Because then I'm told, then they're going to even protect me from my parent.
Yeah. It's interesting people's views. And I know there's a lot of religions, and I am a Christian, and I do talk about God, and I don't push my faith and beliefs on other people, and because I don't ever want, because everybody's so different. We're all unique, and everybody's on their own journeys. And so something that I've learned is, God really is, well, my belief is God is love, and he loves us where we're at. We're all sinners. We all screw up. We all do things wrong. He's the only judge. So then it frees us up to be more in a relationship, rather than it's, you have to check the box. You have to go to church on Sunday. You have to do this. You have to do that.
And when I say I'm not a
And
Christian, those are the things I'm talking about. What I, in my mind, I think of as a Christian, and how it is most commonly, in my
yes,
experience,
for sure. Right.
presented, especially in my region of the country,
Right.
and
Right.
even in my upbringing. I don't identify with the brand of Christianity that is so mainstream and prevalent. When I say I'm not a
Because it's religion.
I don't know who Jesus was. I wasn't there. I don't deny, God as a,
Yeah.
I don't know. My
Right.
grandchildren, I have a great relationship with I do with my kids too. Like, my kids and I are close, but
That's
my
awesome.
grandkids, we talk a lot, and they have a lot of questions, and I feel comfortable telling them, honey, I don't know. Like, they'll say, what happens after we die? I don't know. I've never been dead. Like, we
Right.
can talk about what people believe. We can talk about some ideas and theories. They have great ideas about it. Ask a 7-year-old what happens
Oh
after.
my gosh, they're so creative.
Yeah. And I enjoy that. And I think that's what's healthy. And that's when I say I'm not a Christian. I'm not a religious, church going, Bible fundamentalist
Right.
believer.
I mean, everybody's on their own journeys, and that, I mean, I love that. That's one of the reasons I love doing this podcast, is there's such a variety of people, and I mean, everybody's so unique and different, and our beliefs are so different. And so
And I
we're
respect
just
that. I respect what people believe. If people are,
absolutely.
I do not respect being judged. I have 2 gay children. I have 2 LGBTQ children. I do not appreciate them being persecuted. That is not anything I'm going to subscribe to or be happy about, or have a relationship with people that persecute my kids. No, ma'am. So,
And
like,
unfortunately, religion has
yes,
a bad name, and
yeah,
I really do believe in loving people where they're at. So, but for time's sake, because we are a little bit over our time, I really appreciate all that you have shared, and thank you. And it's very enlightening, and we can contact you because you're an advocate for the Resiliency Foundation. And I loved, that you're such an advocate for ending child marriage, um, and hopefully I don't say that. I always say this word wrong, exploitation. I
yes.
struggle with that word. And so I'm really excited to have gotten to interview you, and I thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me. And I want to please allow me to end with, please contact your lawmakers. Like, if we don't do something about this, it's not going to change. And like Dr. Seuss said, unless someone cares a whole awful lot, it's not going to get better.
Right.
It's not. And I just am asking people to care, and to know that this is happening to over 200,000 girls, or mostly girls, in the last 20 years. Like, this is a lot of people, and it affects us economically. And as a society, this has an impact on human trafficking and everything, generational trauma. So it is important, and I just hope people realize how much
It
so.
is important. So I appreciate your time and thank you very much, Cathy.
Thank you.